During the will reading, my parents laughed as my sister got $6.9 million. Me? They tossed me $1, saying, "Earn your own." My mom sneered, "Some kids just don't measure up." But when Grandpa's final letter was read, she exploded. Imagine this. You're sitting in a sterile lawyer's office, watching your sister's face light up as she's handed $6.9 million. Then, the attorney turns to you and, with a barely perceptible smirk, tells you your inheritance is $1. My grandfather, my hero, the man who shaped me, had just delivered the ultimate betrayal. Or had he? Because something in that moment, in the silence that followed, felt incredibly, chillingly wrong. Before I tell you how my grandfather's final, brutal chess move turned my family upside down, if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Growing up in our perfectly manicured suburban home outside of Boston, life looked normal. We weren't the wealthiest, but my parents, Richard and Elizabeth Riley, made sure we had the latest gadgets, the right clothes, the appearance of success. To them, optics were everything. My older sister, Caroline, 3 years my senior, was their golden child. Beautiful, effortlessly social, and most importantly to my parents, practical. She mirrored their every desire: prestigious business school, impeccable posture, a perfect, executive wife-in-training smile. Every family gathering became a stage for Caroline's latest triumph, met with my parents' beaming, almost ravenous pride. Then there was me. From the earliest age, my heart beat for science, specifically environmental conservation. While Caroline interned at country clubs, I spent my weekends knee-deep in mud at wildlife rehabilitation centers or cleaning up beaches. My passion was met with thinly veiled disdain. "Environmental science won't pay for the lifestyle you're accustomed to, Amanda," my mother would declare, waving a perfectly manicured hand, as if dismissing a fly. Caroline understands the importance of stability. But one person saw through the facade. My grandfather, Maxwell. A retired investment banker with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He was the anomaly in our status-obsessed family, a man who made millions but lived modestly, giving generously to causes he truly believed in. He wore the same worn leather watch for decades, ignoring my mother's endless attempts to upgrade him to something more appropriate. "The true value of something isn't in its price tag, Mandy," he'd tell me, using the nickname only he was allowed. "It's in the purpose it serves." During college summer breaks, I'd escape to his lake house in the Berkshires. While my parents and Caroline jetted off to European capitals, Grandpa and I would just sit on the dock, fishing. We'd talk about everything: climate change, philosophy, the universe. He never once made me feel like my interests were impractical or, worse, a disappointment. "The world needs more people who care about its future than its stock market," he'd say, a glint in his sharp eyes. "Your passion has purpose, Mandy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words were my shield. Family gatherings, however, were a different beast. Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners felt less like celebrations and more like annual performance reviews. My mother orchestrated every detail, from the linen napkins to the carefully curated conversations designed to trumpet Caroline's achievements. "Caroline just secured a summer internship at Goldman Sachs," my mother would announce, serving pie with a triumphant, almost predatory smile. Then came the inevitable, dreaded pivot to me. "Amanda is still exploring her options," she'd say, a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. My father, a corporate attorney with perpetually furrowed brows, would chime in with practical advice that always landed like a punch. "There's no money in saving trees, Amanda. It's time to think about your future realistically." But then, I'd catch Grandpa Maxwell's wink across the table. Sometimes, he'd subtly change the subject. Other times, he'd directly challenge them. "Not everyone measures success by their bank account, Richard," he once told my father, his voice quiet but firm. "Some of the richest people I know have never set foot on Wall Street." The tension would thicken, my mother clearing her throat to redirect to safer topics. But I'd always catch Grandpa's subtle nod of encouragement. In those moments, I knew, unequivocally, that I had at least one ally in the family. One person who truly saw me. 2 years ago, when Grandpa was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the family dynamic shifted again. Suddenly, my parents and Caroline were making frequent, almost performative visits to his home. Expensive gifts appeared. Offers to manage his affairs were practically shouted. Their sudden concern seemed directly proportional to his substantial net worth. I, on the other hand, simply visited him as I always had. I'd bring homemade soup, sit with him as he grew weaker, and we'd watch old westerns or I'd read from his favorite mystery novels. These were sacred, quiet moments. During one of my last visits, just 3 months before he passed, he seemed unusually alert despite the heavy medication. "Mandy," he said, taking my hand with surprising strength. "Remember that timing is everything. In investments and in life." My brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Grandpa?" He smiled, a cryptic, knowing look in his eyes. "Patience is its own reward. The truth always rises to the surface, eventually." Then, just as quickly, he changed the subject, asking about my latest research project. I wish I'd pressed him more. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in the field, knee-deep in a stream collecting water samples, when my phone rang. My mother's voice was formal, utterly devoid of emotion, almost businesslike. "Your grandfather passed this morning. The funeral is being arranged for Friday. Please wear something appropriate." No comfort. No acknowledgement of the profound bond we'd shared. Just logistics and, of course, appearances. The funeral was exactly what my mother wanted, elegant, restrained, and designed to impress the right people. I watched her numb, as she seamlessly networked with Grandpa's former colleagues, a grim smile fixed on her face even in grief. Caroline wore designer black, her makeup flawless, shedding precisely 2 tears during the eulogy, perfectly timed, perfectly understated. My father spent most of the reception discussing investment strategies with Grandpa's financial advisors. I stood alone, by the photo display I had helped arrange, looking at snapshots of Grandpa's life, a young man in the army, holding my mother as a baby, teaching me to fish when I was 7. A vibrant life, reduced to a collage and polite conversation over expensive canapes. A week later, the official notice arrived from Mr. Peterson, Grandpa's attorney, about the reading of the will. My mother immediately went shopping for a new outfit. Caroline canceled client meetings. My father was already deep in researching estate tax implications. For me, it wasn't about the money. I just craved closure, one final connection to the man who had truly seen me when the rest of my family looked right through me. I didn't expect much in terms of inheritance. His material things weren't important. I hoped for some final words of wisdom, maybe his old fishing gear or the collection of conservation books we'd discussed. Anything that felt like him. The night before the will reading, sleep was impossible. I sat on my apartment balcony, staring at the stars, remembering Grandpa teaching me constellations at the lake house. "Some patterns are only visible when you know what to look for," he'd said. I couldn't have known then how chillingly prophetic those words would become. The offices of Peterson Blackwell and Associates were exactly what you'd expect. Top floor of a sleek downtown building, floor-to-ceiling windows boasting panoramic views of Boston, a constant, subtle reminder of the vast wealth that flowed through these rooms. The conference room itself was a monument to affluence, an imposing mahogany table, gleaming under soft, calculated lighting, leather chairs that creaked with an almost newness, walls lined with law books that looked more decorative than read. My mother, Elizabeth Riley, was, of course, the first to arrive. Punctual, prepared, and always perfectly poised, especially when money was involved. She wore a navy Chanel suit that I calculated, with a jolt, probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her ash blonde hair, styled in a perfect bob, didn't even twitch when she turned her head sharply to assess my outfit. "You could have made more of an effort, Amanda," she hissed, her eyes raking over my simple black dress. "This is an important day." My father, Richard Riley, strode in next, checking his Rolex with a curt nod to Mr. Peterson. He carried that perpetual look of a man calculating costs and benefits, even at his own father-in-law's while reading. His eyes held a predatory gleam of anticipation. Caroline, ever the showstopper, arrived last. Her stiletto heels clicked importantly across the hardwood floor, a deliberate, resonant sound. She air-kissed my cheeks, the faint, expensive scent of her perfume lingering, before taking her seat beside our mother, crossing her legs elegantly and placing her designer handbag precisely in her lap. I sat slightly apart, feeling the familiar sting of being an outsider in my own family. The distance, I realized, wasn't accidental. Mr. Peterson wasn't alone. Harold Winters, Grandpa's best friend of 50 years, sat quietly in a corner chair, his face etched with genuine sorrow. Marta Jimenez, Grandpa's housekeeper for 2 decades, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her grief raw and unconcealed, a stark contrast to my family's composed, almost eager faces. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Peterson began, adjusting his glasses. Maxwell was very specific about how this proceeding should unfold. My mother straightened, her smile tightening. "We're all eager to honor his wishes, of course." Mr. Peterson nodded, a subtle, almost unreadable expression on his face as he unfolded a document. "I'll begin with some smaller bequests before addressing the main estate." Those smaller bequests took nearly 30 agonizing minutes. Grandpa had left generous sums to his favorite charities, his loyal staff, and several close friends. Harold received Grandpa's vintage car collection, a true passion. Marta was given a life estate in the guest house on Grandpa's main property, plus a sum that made her gasp, pressing the tissue to her lips, tears flowing freely. My mother's foot tapped with increasing impatience. My father checked his watch twice, a subtle, irritated gesture. Caroline maintained her pleasant expression, but her fingers drummed a silent, rapid rhythm against her purse. "Now," Mr. Peterson announced, finally, his voice shifting, "to the main distributions." My heart hammered against my ribs. "To my daughter Elizabeth and her husband, Richard, I leave my primary residence in Beacon Hill and my vacation property in Palm Beach." My mother's smile became utterly genuine for the first time that day. The properties were worth millions. Pure, unadulterated triumph. "To my granddaughter, Caroline Riley, I leave the sum of $6.9 million to be distributed in a trust as outlined in Section 4 of this document." Caroline's intake of breath was audible, a sharp gasp of pure elation. She reached for my mother's hand, squeezing it triumphantly. My father nodded, a gesture of profound approval. All eyes then, inevitably, turned to me. I felt a strange, cold hollowness bloom in my stomach. "To my granddaughter, Amanda Grace Riley," Mr. Peterson continued, his voice softening ever so slightly, "I leave the sum of $1. The room went utterly silent. The world tilted. I felt the blood drain from my face, my vision tunneling. $1. I struggled desperately to maintain my composure, my mind reeling. "Additionally," Mr. Peterson continued, his gaze direct, "Amanda is to receive this sealed envelope, to be opened after the conclusion of today's reading." He handed me a thick manila envelope, my name written on it in Grandpa's distinctive, familiar handwriting. My hands trembled, ever so slightly, as I accepted it. The silence shattered. My mother's short, sharp laugh pierced the air. "Well, that's clarifying, isn't it?" she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. Always the disappointment. Caroline, at least, had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable, though the gleam of triumph never quite left her eyes. "I'm sure Grandpa had his reasons," she offered, in a tone that clearly implied those reasons were my own personal failings. My father simply shook his head, a dismissive gesture that cut deeper than any words. I clutched the envelope, my knuckles white, fighting a primal urge to bolt from the room. To escape the pity in Harold's kind eyes, the confusion on Marta's face, and the barely concealed satisfaction on my family's. But pride, a fierce, desperate pride, kept me rooted to my seat. Whatever Grandpa's reasons, whatever game this was, I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. By the way, if you're still with me, still reeling from this twist, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Trust me, the story only gets wilder from here. "Is that all?" my mother demanded, already gathering her purse, her mind clearly on celebrating Caroline's windfall. But Mr. Peterson held up a hand. "Actually, no. Maxwell prepared a video." He was most insistent about everyone remaining present for it. My father's annoyance was palpable. Is that really necessary? We all have commitments. It is a condition of the will, Mr. Peterson stated, his voice firm. All beneficiaries must be present for the entire proceeding or risk forfeiture. That settled it. No matter how dismissive they were of me, my family would sit through hours if it meant not risking their newfound millions. Mr. Peterson dimmed the lights. A screen descended. After a moment of static, my grandfather's face appeared. He looked frail, the cancer having taken its cruel toll, but his eyes were still sharp, still alert. The eyes of a man who had built a fortune by seeing what others missed. None of us, absolutely none of us, were prepared for what came next. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, his voice stronger on video than it had been in his final weeks, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. And you're all sitting in Peterson's uncomfortable conference chairs, wondering what this old man has up his sleeve. A small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth. I recognized that expression instantly. It was the same one he wore when he was about to win at chess, a game he taught me during rainy afternoons at the lake house. A shiver ran down my spine. He addressed Harold first. To my dear friend Harold, thank you for 50 years of honesty. In a world of yes men, you always told me the truth, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. The cars are yours because you appreciated them for their craftsmanship, not their price tags. Harold nodded silently, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. To Marta, whose kindness made my house a home, Grandpa continued, his voice softening, your dignity and work ethic reminded me daily of what truly matters. The guest house has always been more yours than mine. Marta whispered something in Spanish, pressing a tissue to her trembling lips. Then, Grandpa's expression subtly changed as he addressed my parents. Elizabeth, my only daughter. You were always ambitious, even as a little girl. I remember how determined you were to have the biggest dollhouse, the prettiest dresses. Richard, you and I have had our differences over the years, but I never doubted your dedication to the lifestyle you chose. My mother's smile faltered. There was something in his tone, not quite criticism, but certainly not the warm praise she'd clearly expected. A cold knot formed in my stomach. To Caroline, congratulations on your inheritance. You've always understood the value of money and appearances. I've structured your trust with quarterly distributions to ensure it provides for you over time. Use it wisely. Caroline's expression flickered, a mix of satisfaction and uncertainty. Grandpa's words seemed double-edged, and I wasn't the only one who noticed the veiled meaning. Then, he looked directly into the camera. And I had the uncanny, bone-deep feeling he was looking right at me. Amanda, my Mandy. You see what others miss. You always have, from the time you were small and noticed the bird's nest in the oak tree that everyone else walked past. Remember what I told you about timing and patience. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, he saw me. He always saw me. Grandpa's expression became utterly serious. Now, to the matter at hand. My will may seem straightforward, perhaps even unfair to some of you. But there's more to the story, as there usually is in life. He leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. I've arranged a series of tasks that must be completed before the full terms of my estate can be implemented. Consider it my final lesson to all of you. My father made a sound of protest, quickly silenced by my mother's sharp elbow to his ribs. Mr. Peterson has been instructed to provide sealed letters with specific opening dates and instructions. All conditions must be followed exactly as written. Any attempt to contest this will or circumvent the process will result in the entirety of my estate, every property, every investment, every single penny, being immediately transferred to the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Conservation. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible, a strangled gasp. My father's face darkened, a storm brewing. Caroline's perfect posture stiffened, her eyes wide. The first step begins today, Amanda. The envelope you've received contains the key to my lake house and instructions for the first task. I suggest you go there immediately. Grandpa's eyes twinkled with that familiar, mischievous light I'd loved since childhood. And remember, things aren't always as they appear. Sometimes a single dollar can be worth more than millions. The screen went black. The lights came up. All eyes in that room were suddenly, overwhelmingly on me, and the envelope clutched in my trembling hands. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. That concludes today's official reading. As stated, any attempts to contest the will or interfere with the process Mr. Riley has established will trigger the charitable remainder clause. My mother, ever the social chameleon, recovered first, her forced smile sliding back into place. Well, that was certainly dramatic, she chirped with a fake laugh. Amanda will naturally accompany you to the lake house. Family support and all that. The sudden, whiplash shift from dismissal to family support wasn't lost on me. An hour ago, I was a disappointment, a dollar heir. Now, I was their access point to whatever elaborate game Grandpa had set up. I don't think that's necessary, I said, surprised by the quiet steadiness in my own voice. Don't be ridiculous, my father cut in, his authoritative tone back in full force. This clearly affects all of us. We'll drive up together tomorrow morning. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I stood my ground against him. No, my voice was firm. Grandpa addressed the envelope to me, and I'll go alone. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly. Amanda, my mother hissed, her composure finally slipping. This is not the time for your usual stubbornness. Actually, Mr. Peterson interjected, his voice surprisingly firm. The instructions are quite specific that Amanda must be the one to open the lake house and retrieve the next communication. Others may visit subsequently, but the initial task is hers alone. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but the threat of the charitable remainder clause was enough to silence further protests. As we gathered our things to leave, Caroline approached me in the hallway, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I could drive up with you tomorrow, she offered, her voice lowered so our parents couldn't hear. Just for support. This is all very strange. I studied my sister's face, trying to discern her true motivation. Was this genuine concern, or was she simply ensuring her access to the next phase of Grandpa's plan? I need to do this alone first, I said finally. But I'll call you after. She nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing her features before her composed smile returned. Of course. Just keep us in the loop, okay? As I walked to my car, clutching the unopened envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa's final, grand game had only just begun. And for once, I wasn't simply a pawn on someone else's board. I was the one holding the next move. The 2-hour drive to the Berkshires was a blur of conflicted emotions. I waited until I was well outside Boston, my heart still thrumming, before pulling over at a rest stop. With trembling hands, I opened Grandpa's envelope. Inside was the promised key, attached to the familiar, fish-shaped keychain I'd given him for his 70th birthday. My stomach clenched. There was also a letter, in his distinctive, slanted handwriting. Mandy, it began. Asterisk if you're reading this, then the first phase is complete. Go to the lake house alone. In my study, you'll find the answers to questions you haven't thought to ask yet. Remember our chess games. The first move is never the most important one. It's the setup that matters. Trust yourself. Love, Grandpa, asterisk cryptic as ever, even from beyond. I smiled, despite the tightness in my chest, and continued driving. Memories flooded back with each familiar turn, the scent of pine, the sound of crickets, the quiet companionship. The lake house came into view just as the afternoon sun hit the water, creating those dancing diamonds of light that had fascinated me since childhood. The modest A-frame cabin, with its wide deck overlooking the water, was exactly as I remembered. Perhaps a bit more weathered, but untouched. Grandpa had famously refused my mother's repeated suggestions to update or expand the property. Some things are perfect just as they are, he'd always said. I parked, reaching for my overnight bag. That's when another car pulled up behind me. Then another. My heart sank, heavy and cold, as I recognized my parents' Mercedes and Caroline's gleaming BMW. Surprise! Caroline called out, her voice a little too bright as she emerged. We thought we'd join you after all. Family adventure. My mother didn't bother with the pretense. We're not letting you handle this alone, Amanda. There's clearly something significant happening, and we all have a stake in the outcome. The will specified that I should come alone, I reminded them, a slow burn of anger building inside me. For the initial entry only, my father countered smoothly, already on the offensive. Peterson confirmed we could join afterward. And look, you've arrived first. You'll enter first. We're just here to support the process. Support the process. Not support me. The distinction was crystal clear. Rather than argue, I turned and walked to the front door. The key slid into the lock with a familiar, comforting click, and the door swung open on slightly creaky hinges. The scent of pine and old books, Grandpa's scent, enveloped me. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, half expecting to hear his voice calling from the kitchen, offering hot chocolate. The house was exactly as he'd left it, though a fine layer of dust covered the surfaces. Fishing rods still leaned in the corner, his reading glasses on the side table next to his favorite armchair, a bookmark still protruding from the mystery novel he'd been reading. My family pushed in behind me, their designer shoes clicking on the hardwood floors, the sound jarringly out of place in this sanctuary of simplicity. God, it's stuffy in here, my mother complained, moving immediately to open windows. I've always said this place needs a proper renovation. My father was already assessing, his eyes cataloging items of potential value. The property itself is the real asset. Lakefront in this area goes for a premium now. Caroline moved to the mantel, picking up framed photos, studying them with a newfound, unsettling interest. I forgot how many pictures of you he had here, she said, her tone unreadable. I ignored them all and moved toward the hallway that led to Grandpa's study. This door had always been kept locked when we visited as children. Not out of secrecy, but respect. Everyone needs a space that's entirely their own, he'd explained. The fish keychain held a second, smaller key, which fit this lock perfectly. I felt my family hovering behind me, their collective breath hot on my neck, as the door swung open. The study was smaller than I remembered from my few childhood glimpses. Walls of bookshelves surrounded a simple oak desk, positioned to look out over the lake. Maps of various countries were pinned to a corkboard. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a worn leather chair sat waiting, as if Grandpa had just stepped out for a moment. Start looking for anything valuable, my father instructed, moving immediately to the filing cabinets. Investment records, property deeds, anything that might explain what's happening. Richard, my mother scolded, though her own eyes were already scanning the room, calculating. Show some respect. Maxwell was my father. I approached the desk slowly, drawn to a framed photo I'd never seen before. It showed a much younger Grandpa, standing proudly in front of a small office building. The sign above the door read, Riley Innovations. Something tickled at my memory, a faint echo. Before I could grasp it, Caroline was beside me. What's that? She asked, reaching for the photo. I don't know, I admitted, my brow furrowed. I've never seen it. My father glanced over. Riley Innovations? Never heard of it. Something in his tone, a slight shift, made me look up sharply, but his expression gave nothing away as he returned to rifling through files. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers, followed by a question. Where did it all begin? It's a puzzle, I murmured, studying the numbers. They looked like dates followed by dollar amounts. The earliest was from 50 years ago, $2,975. That number resonated with something Grandpa had once told me about his very first investment. While my family continued their frantic search, I sat in Grandpa's chair and opened the desk drawer. Inside was a leather-bound book, First Steps embossed on the cover. When I opened it, I found records of Grandpa's earliest investments, including the $2,975 he'd invested in a small technology company in 1975, his first major success. What did you find? My mother appeared instantly at my shoulder, her eyes alight with greed. Just Grandpa's old investment diary, I said, trying to sound casual, continuing to page through it. A final entry caught my eye, a note that seemed out of place among the financial records. Asterisk, the truth is in the foundation. Remember to look beneath the surface. Asterisk, as I pondered this, my attention was drawn to a small decorative chess piece, a knight, that had always sat on Grandpa's desk. On impulse, I picked it up. The bottom felt loose. When I twisted it, the base came away, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside, a small key and a folded note. What's that? Caroline asked, suddenly beside me again, her voice sharp with curiosity. I'm not sure, I said truthfully, unfolding the note. Asterisk second letter in the floor safe. Combination. Date of betrayal. Asterisk my father, meanwhile, had found an old photo album and was flipping through it impatiently. Nothing but sentimental nonsense, he muttered, tossing it aside carelessly. Several photos slipped out, scattering across the floor. Richard, my mother snapped, though her concern wasn't for the photos. She was pulling pages from the album, examining them closely, discarding those that didn't appear to contain anything useful. There must be some record of his investments here. I knelt to gather the fallen photos, noticing they were mostly of Grandpa with my mother as a child, and later with me. One caught my attention, a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local Entrepreneur Sells Patent for Millions." Grandpa stood shaking hands with another man, both smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Maxwell Riley sells innovative circuit design to Wilson Technologies." "Mom," I said slowly, my voice tight. "Did Grandpa own a company called Riley Innovations?" Her hands froze in their destructive sorting. "That was before your time," she dismissed, a small venture that didn't amount to much. But her voice had an undeniable edge, the same tone she used when covering up something uncomfortable at dinner parties. A chill went through me. Meanwhile, I was examining the floor, looking for any sign of a safe. In the corner, partially hidden by a small rug, I noticed a subtle seam in the hardwood. Pulling back the rug revealed a small floor safe, its dial waiting. Date of betrayal, I murmured to myself. What did that mean? My father was on his phone, speaking in low tones about property values and development potential. Caroline was opening and closing books on the shelves, checking for hidden contents, utterly oblivious. I stared at the newspaper clipping again, specifically at the date, June 17, 1995. Suddenly, a cold, hard click echoed in my mind. 61795. The combination. I entered the numbers into the safe style. With a satisfying thunk, the door released. Inside was another envelope, thicker than the first, and a small, leather notebook, secured with a rubber band. Before anyone could react, before anyone could snatch them, I grabbed both items and stood up. My heart hammered. This was it. What did you find? My father was suddenly, alarmingly, focused entirely on me, his phone call about property values forgotten. Another letter from Grandpa, I said, holding the envelope close, and a notebook. Well, open it, my mother demanded, her composure finally shattered. This treasure hunt has gone on long enough. I think I'm supposed to read it privately first, I said, thinking fast. Just give me a moment to breathe, to understand. That's absurd, my father cut in. This concerns all of us. Whatever game our grandfather is playing affects the entire family. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly, I reminded them, echoing Mr. Peterson's earlier warning. I'm not risking the charitable remainder clause because you're impatient. My mother's eyes narrowed, dangerous slits. Amanda Grace Riley, you'll show us that letter immediately. We are your parents, and this is a family matter. Something in me snapped. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, criticized, it all crystallized into a single, blazing moment of perfect clarity and resolve. No, I said simply. Firmly. Grandpa addressed this to me. I'll read it first, and share what's appropriate afterward. My father took a step toward me, his face darkening, contorted in a mask of fury. You ungrateful. Stop it, Dad. Caroline interrupted, suddenly. She looked as shocked as my parents. She's right. We can't risk triggering that clause. My parents turned to her in stunned surprise. Caroline never contradicted them. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. I have 6.9 million reasons to make sure we follow the rules exactly. Let Amanda read the letter first. It wasn't exactly support, but it was something. I seized the moment. I'm going to read this in private, I said, moving toward the door. I'll let you know if there's anything you need to know. This is ridiculous, my mother fumed. What could possibly be so secret? I guess we'll find out, I replied, walking out of the study with more confidence than I felt, the letter and notebook clutched tightly to my chest. As I headed for the front door, Caroline followed me into the hallway. Amanda, wait, she said, her voice unusually hesitant, softer. For once, her perfect mask had slipped, revealing genuine conflict underneath. "What is it?" I asked, my guard still up. She glanced back toward the study, ensuring our parents couldn't hear. "Things aren't great with Mom and Dad financially. Dad's firm lost some major clients last year. They've been living on credit and appearances. They're counting on this inheritance." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given our family's lifelong obsession with status, but it did. It landed with a dull thud in my stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" Caroline's smile was bitter, a painful twist of her lips. "Maybe I'm tired of the act too. Just be careful. They're desperate. And desperate people do desperate things." Before I could respond, we heard our parents emerging from the study, their voices sharp and agitated. I hurried out the front door, the envelope and notebook clutched tight. I needed space. I needed quiet. I needed to understand what Grandpa was trying to show me. "This isn't over, Amanda," my father called after me, his voice raw with anger. "You can't keep family matters to yourself." I kept walking, not looking back. For the first time, I was beginning to understand that family matters might have a far more sinister, double meaning in the story Grandpa was unfolding. I drove into the small town and checked into the cozy inn where Grandpa and I used to have lunch after our fishing trips. Martha, the innkeeper, recognized me immediately. "Amanda." "It's been too long," she said warmly, her eyes kind. "I was so sorry to hear about Maxwell. He was one of the good ones." "Thanks, Martha. I miss him." "Are you staying at the lake house?" she asked, handing me a room key. "Not tonight. Too many memories," I said, not mentioning the family invasion. "And I need some quiet to go through some of Grandpa's papers." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "Room 8 has the best view of the mountains. Maxwell always said it helped him think." Once settled in the cozy room, I spread the contents of the envelope on the bed. Another letter from Grandpa, yes, but also several legal documents and old newspaper clippings. I opened the small, leather notebook first. What I found inside stunned me into breathless silence. It was a detailed record of Grandpa's true financial holdings, far more extensive than what had been revealed in the will. Properties across 3 continents, sprawling investment portfolios, patents, and business interests totaling well over $24 million. The single dollar I'd received felt even more symbolic now, a pointed, almost cruel joke. My hands trembling, I turned to Grandpa's second letter. "Mandy," it began. Asterisk if you're reading this. "You've taken the first step in understanding why things are as they are." The notebook contains the truth about my estate, far more substantial than what was revealed at the reading. But money is just money. What matters is the truth behind it. Your next task is to investigate Riley Innovations. The company's records are held by Peterson in a separate file. Call him, and he'll provide access. Once you understand what happened there, you'll know why I've structured things this way. Be careful, Mandy. The people closest to us can sometimes be the ones we know least. Trust your instincts. They've always been good. Love, Grandpa, asterisk my heart hammered. The people closest to us can sometimes be the ones we know least. A chill, cold as ice, ran down my spine. I immediately called Mr. Peterson. He wasn't surprised to hear from me. "Maxwell anticipated your call around this time," he said calmly. "I have the Riley Innovations files ready. I can send them securely to your email now." Within minutes, my laptop pinged with the arrival of dozens of scanned documents. As I devoured them, the full, devastating story of Riley Innovations emerged. And with it, a gut-wrenching, disturbing revelation about my family. Grandpa had founded Riley Innovations in the early 1990s, developing a revolutionary circuit design that promised to transform computing efficiency. The company was small but growing, with several patents pending, on the cusp of something huge. Then, in 1995, he suddenly sold everything to Wilson Technologies for a mere fraction of its worth. The timing struck me as profoundly odd. Why would a savvy businessman like my grandfather unload a promising company for so little? I dug deeper, my fingers flying across the trackpad. There it was. A damning memo from Richard Riley, my own father, who had been handling some legal work for the company. He had advised Grandpa that a competing patent would render their technology worthless, recommending an immediate fire sale. 6 months later, Wilson Technologies used Grandpa's exact design to launch their most successful product line ever, making billions. And here's the kicker. No competing patent had ever emerged. Not one. The most damning detail? My mother had been working at Wilson Technologies in their acquisitions department at the time of the sale. The pieces slammed into place with sickening, brutal clarity. My parents hadn't just benefited from Grandpa's work, they had orchestrated the fraudulent sale of his company. They had betrayed him for their own financial gain, receiving compensation from Wilson that was never reflected in the official sale. They robbed him. I sat back, utterly stunned, the documents scattering around me like fallen leaves. This was it. This was the betrayal. Was this what Grandpa had meant by his greatest disappointment? A memory surfaced, Grandpa telling me years ago about making a mistake and trusting the wrong people. Sometimes those closest to you can be blind to your best interests, he'd said. I thought he was talking about business associates. Not family. Never family. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson again. I found the Riley Innovations documents, I stated, my voice tight. Did my grandfather know about my parents' involvement? A pause. Then, Peterson's calm, almost grave voice. He discovered the truth about 5 years ago, Amanda. An old colleague from Wilson finally came clean about the backdoor dealings. Maxwell was, devastated isn't a strong enough word. But he was also strategic. He wanted undeniable proof before confronting anyone. And did he get it? Yes. Everything is documented in the files I sent you. There's more, Amanda. Your grandfather restructured his entire estate plan after learning the truth. What you saw at the reading was just the surface. I spent the rest of the day reviewing everything, my initial shock slowly, searingly, giving way to a white-hot anger. By evening, I was ready. I drove back to the lake house, a grim certainty in my gut that my family would still be there, waiting, plotting. They were. Sitting on the deck, wine glasses in hand, they were already discussing development potential for the property. Their conversation halted abruptly when they saw my face. Amanda, my mother began, with that sickeningly false brightness. We were just discussing how to profit from Grandpa's home. I cut her off, my voice steely. Or were you reminiscing about Riley Innovations and how successfully you engineered its sale? The wine glass nearly slipped from my mother's trembling hand. My father's face hardened, contorting into the expression he used in tough negotiations, cold, calculating. I don't know what you think you've discovered, he said carefully, his voice laced with venom, but business decisions from 30 years ago are hardly relevant now. Fraud is always relevant, Dad, I countered, my voice rising. So is betrayal. I placed copies of the most damning documents onto the glass-top table between us. My mother's memo to Wilson's CEO, outlining Grandpa's vulnerabilities. My father's falsified legal opinion. The backdated consulting agreement that had paid them nearly $500,000 after the sale went through. It was all there, laid bare. Where did you get these? My father demanded, his voice dangerous, barely contained. Grandpa had copies all along, I said, my gaze unflinching. He knew what you did. Both of you. My mother recovered quickly, her social mask sliding back into place, a desperate, pathetic attempt at control. You're blowing ancient history out of proportion. Business is complicated, Amanda. Your grandfather did very well from that sale. He was robbed of millions, I countered, my voice thick with emotion, by his own daughter and son-in-law. Caroline had been unusually quiet, staring at the documents, her eyes wide with growing horror. Is this true? She finally asked our parents, her voice small, almost broken. Did you really do this? Of course not, our mother snapped, her voice shrill. Amanda is being dramatic, as usual. But something had visibly shifted in Caroline's expression. She turned to me, a desperate glint in her eyes. This is what Grandpa's game is about, isn't it? He's making things right. Before I could answer, a courier arrived at the door, a special delivery envelope addressed to me. Mr. Peterson said to deliver this exactly at 7 p.m., the young man explained. Inside was a third letter from Grandpa, with a handwritten note from Peterson, to be opened when the truth is laid bare. My hands shook as I broke the seal, acutely aware of my family watching, breathless. I began to read the letter aloud, my voice growing stronger with each word, each devastating revelation. My dear family, it began, Asterisk, if this letter is being read, then Amanda has discovered the truth about Riley Innovations. The betrayal I experienced at the hands of those I trusted most was the greatest disappointment of my life. But it taught me to look more closely at character, at who people truly are beneath the appearances they maintain. The will reading you attended was part of a test, one final assessment of character. The true disposition of my estate depends entirely on how each of you has behaved during this process. Everything has been observed and documented. Asterisk, my mother's face had gone deathly pale. My father looked like he might actually be sick. Everything has been observed and documented. Asterisk, Mr. Peterson has been instructed to arrive at the lake house at this time with a notary and witnesses to document the final phase of my estate plan. The choice of who truly inherits now depends on what has been revealed about each of you. Asterisk, as if on cue, Mr. Peterson's car pulled up outside, followed by two others. My mother stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass, which shattered on the deck. This is ridiculous. A person can't control from the grave. We'll contest this entire charade. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Peterson said, entering with his associates. Maxwell anticipated every possible legal challenge. Contesting will only ensure everything goes to charity, as stipulated. Besides, he added, his gaze chillingly direct, you might want to see this first. He opened his laptop and played a video. It showed my parents, the previous day, meticulously searching Grandpa's study. My mother tearing pages from photo albums. My father making calls about developing the property, before Grandpa was even properly buried. The lake house has been equipped with recording devices for the past week, Peterson explained, his voice calm, professional. Maxwell wanted to see true colors, not performances. My mother's scream could probably be heard across the lake. You had no right. This is invasion of privacy. My father lunged for the laptop, but one of Peterson's associates blocked him, a silent, imposing presence. Richard Riley, I'd advise against any rash actions. There are legal consequences to destroying evidence. Evidence of what? Caroline asked, her voice small, a fragile whisper. Mr. Peterson turned to her. Evidence of character, Miss Riley. And potentially evidence related to the fraud committed against Maxwell regarding Riley Innovations. He then turned to me. Amanda, your grandfather left instructions that you should be the one to make the final decision once all facts were known. What decision? I asked, utterly confused, my mind reeling from the onslaught. Whether to pursue legal action against your parents for their fraud, which would likely result in criminal charges given the evidence, or to implement the alternative inheritance plan he designed. My father's face had gone ashen. You wouldn't, he croaked, looking at me, we're your parents. Parents who called me a disappointment my entire life, I replied, a lifetime of hurt surfacing at once. Who dismissed my dreams? Who valued appearances over truth? Who betrayed their own father for money? What's the alternative plan? Caroline asked quietly, pulling me back from the brink of my anger. Peterson handed me another document. Maxwell restructured his estate to place the majority of his true fortune, approximately $24 million, plus the intellectual property rights that should have made him a billionaire, into a trust. Amanda would control this trust, with ethical oversight provisions. My mother made a strangled sound, a choked gasp of pure despair. My father seemed to age 10 years in an instant. The properties already distributed would remain with their recipients, Peterson continued, but the trust would control all liquid assets and business interests. So Amanda gets everything. After all we've done for this family. My mother's voice had taken on a hysterical, desperate edge. What exactly have you done for this family, Mom? I asked quietly, my voice trembling. Lie? Manipulate? Betray? You ungrateful little, she began, but Caroline cut her off, her voice surprisingly strong. Stop it, Mom. Just stop. My sister's voice was tired, but laced with a new, steel-like resolve. It's over. We've lost. My father tried a different approach, his voice suddenly conciliatory, dripping with false sincerity. Amanda, sweetheart, you have to understand. Business decisions are complicated. We never meant to hurt anyone. We can explain everything. But the time for their explanations had passed. The documents spoke for themselves. The recordings showed who they really were. Mr. Peterson, I said finally, my decision firm, I need some time to process this. Can we reconvene tomorrow? He nodded understandingly. Of course. Maxwell left one final message for this moment. Would you like to hear it? At my nod, he played a short audio clip. Grandpa's voice, clear and strong, filled the room. Asterisk forgiveness is optional, Mandy. Wisdom is mandatory. Whatever you decide, do it with clarity and purpose, not emotion. Asterisk, my parents and Caroline left shortly after. My mother in heartbroken tears, my father in stony, seething silence. Caroline paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a strange, raw mix of regret and burgeoning strength. For what it's worth, she said softly, I didn't know about Riley Innovations. But I've known things weren't right for a long time and said nothing. I'm not much better than they are. And then she was gone. After everyone had left, the house fell silent, the air thick with the residue of shattered illusions. I sat alone in Grandpa's study, looking out at the lake as the sun set, painting the water in hues of orange and purple. On the desk, I noticed a photo I hadn't seen before. Grandpa and me, on this very dock, fishing rods in hand, both of us laughing, truly laughing. He had written on the back, "True wealth is measured in moments like these." For the first time since his death, I cried freely, mourning not just his loss, but the family I had never truly had. The shattering of an illusion, yes, but also the painful birth of truth. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the lake a perfect mirror of the blue sky. I had barely slept, weighing options and consequences, trying desperately to separate justice from vengeance, healing from harm. By sunrise, I knew what I needed to do. I called Mr. Peterson and asked him to arrange a meeting at the lake house. Everyone should be there, I said. My parents, Caroline, you and your witnesses, and Harold, too. It's time to finish this. By noon, they had all gathered in the living room. My parents sat rigidly on the sofa, both dressed immaculately, as if appearances could still somehow save them. Caroline had chosen a seat slightly apart, her expression troubled but resolute. Harold sat by the window, his weathered face etched with compassion. Mr. Peterson and his associates maintained their professional neutrality. I stood by the fireplace, Grandpa's final letter in my hands. I'd found it that morning in his desk drawer, marked, "For Amanda, when all is revealed." Thank you all for coming, I began, surprised by the steady strength in my own voice. Yesterday, we learned some difficult truths about our family. Today, we'll decide how to move forward. My father started to speak, but I held up my hand, a gesture of unexpected authority. Please, let me finish. I've spent the night thinking about what Grandpa was trying to teach us with this elaborate plan. It wasn't about punishment or even just justice, though elements of both exist. It was about truth and consequences. I opened the letter and read aloud, my voice clear. Asterisk Mandy, by now you understand why I structured things this way. The final decision is yours, but remember that whatever path you choose will shape not just your future, but who you become. Money can be a tool for good or a weapon for harm. Use it wisely. The truth has been revealed. What matters now is what you all do with it. Asterisk, I looked up at my family. Grandpa's master plan wasn't just about exposing the past. It was a test. One final, excruciating opportunity to show who we really are when faced with uncomfortable truths. Mr. Peterson nodded. Maxwell was quite specific about this. The distribution of his true estate would be determined by how each of you behaved during this process. Everything has been documented, not just the past fraud, but your actions over the past week. He opened a folder. The video evidence from the lake house and other documentation shows a clear pattern of behavior. He turned to my parents, his voice devoid of judgment, simply stating facts. Mr. and Mrs. Riley, your actions demonstrated continued dishonesty, destruction of personal property, and planning to profit from assets before they were legally yours. My mother's face flushed with anger, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Caroline, Peterson continued, your behavior was mixed. You initially aligned with your parents, but showed moments of independence and honesty, particularly yesterday. Caroline nodded slightly, her eyes downcast, a faint blush on her cheeks. Amanda, he said, turning to me, You followed your grandfather's instructions exactly, sought truth rather than advantage, and showed restraint when discoveries were made. As he spoke, two more people entered the room, a notary and Mr. Jacobs, who I recognized as the security expert who had installed Grandpa's home systems. Mr. Jacobs has compiled all video and audio recordings, as instructed, Peterson explained. They've been secured as evidence, should legal proceedings become necessary. At those words, my mother could contain herself no longer. This is absurd. You can't possibly use secret recordings against us. We'll sue for invasion of privacy. The lake house belongs to the estate, Peterson replied calmly. Maxwell had every legal right to monitor his property. Additionally, there were disclosure notices posted, though you may not have noticed them. This is a witch hunt, my father declared, attempting to regain control, his voice shaking with impotent fury. Ancient business dealings being weaponized by a bitter old man. Is that what you think this is about, Richard? Harold spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet but resonant. Maxwell wasn't bitter. He was heartbroken. He trusted you both. Welcomed you as family. The money wasn't what hurt him. It was the betrayal. You have no idea what you're talking about, my mother snapped, venom in her voice. Actually, I do, Harold replied quietly. I was there when he discovered the truth. He aged 10 years that day. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, regaining everyone's attention. The evidence regarding Riley Innovations has been reviewed by our legal team. There are clear indications of fraud, insider trading, and breach of fiduciary duty. The statute of limitations has expired on some aspects, but not all. My father paled visibly. What are you saying? I'm saying, Peterson replied, his gaze unwavering, that should Amanda choose to pursue this matter legally, there would likely be both civil and criminal consequences. The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken threats and shattered trust. All eyes turned to me. That's what this is about, isn't it? My mother said, her voice suddenly pleading, cracking. You want revenge. You've always been jealous of Caroline, resentful of our expectations. Now you have your chance to punish us. This isn't about revenge, Mom, I said quietly, my voice raw but firm. It's about truth. And choices. What does that mean? Caroline asked, her voice a whisper. I took a deep breath. It means I've made my decision about Grandpa's estate and the evidence of fraud. Mr. Peterson handed me a document. This details the two options Maxwell outlined. You may sign where indicated to implement your choice. My parents watched with thinly veiled panic as I reviewed the paper. Caroline's expression was resigned, but calm. I choose option 2, I said finally, signing the document and handing it back to Peterson. What does that mean? My father demanded, his voice hollow. Peterson reviewed the signed document and nodded. It means that Amanda has chosen not to pursue criminal charges regarding the Riley Innovations fraud. My mother sagged with visible relief, a long, shaky breath escaping her lips. However, he continued, and my parents stiffened again. The restructured inheritance plan will be implemented as Maxwell designed. The primary control of his true estate, valued at approximately $24 million, will be placed in a trust overseen by Amanda. The properties already distributed will remain with their recipients, but all other assets will be managed through the trust, with specific ethical guidelines and an oversight board. So, she still gets everything, my mother shrieked, her voice taking on a hysterical edge. After all we've done for this family. What exactly have you done for this family, Mom? I asked quietly, the dam finally breaking. Lie? Manipulate? Betray? You ungrateful little, she began, but Caroline cut her off, her voice surprisingly strong. Stop it, Mom. Just stop. My sister's voice was tired, but utterly resolute. It's over. We've lost. My father tried a different approach, his voice suddenly conciliatory, dripping with false sincerity. Amanda, sweetheart, you have to understand. Business decisions are complicated. We never meant to hurt anyone. We can explain everything. But the time for their explanations had passed. The documents spoke for themselves. The recordings showed who they really were. Mr. Peterson, I said finally, my decision firm, I need some time to process this. Can we reconvene tomorrow? He nodded understandingly. Of course. Maxwell left one final message for this moment. Would you like to hear it? At my nod, he played a short audio clip. Grandpa's voice, clear and strong, filled the room. Asterisk forgiveness is optional, Mandy. Wisdom is mandatory. Whatever you decide, do it with clarity and purpose, not emotion. Asterisk, my parents and Caroline left shortly after. My mother in heartbroken tears, my father in stony, seething silence. Caroline paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a strange, raw mix of regret and burgeoning strength. For what it's worth, she said softly, I didn't know about Riley Innovations. But I've known things weren't right for a long time and said nothing. I'm not much better than they are. And then she was gone. After everyone had left, the house fell silent, the air thick with the residue of shattered illusions. I sat alone in Grandpa's study, looking out at the lake as the sun set, painting the water in hues of orange and purple. On the desk, I noticed a photo I hadn't seen before. Grandpa and me, on this very dock, fishing rods in hand, both of us laughing, truly laughing. He had written on the back, "True wealth is measured in moments like these." For the first time since his death, I cried freely, mourning not just his loss, but the family I had never truly had. The shattering of an illusion, yes, but also the painful birth of truth. 6 months passed like a dream and a lifetime all at once. The lake house had transformed from a simple cabin into the bustling headquarters of the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Innovation. The main house remained largely unchanged, a testament to Grandpa's simple tastes and my desire to honor his memory. But the boathouse? That was now a state-of-the-art research lab, where brilliant scientists studied sustainable technologies. I often found myself on the dock, watching the morning mist rise off the water, remembering how Grandpa and I used to count fish jumping before breakfast. So much had changed. Yet, in the quietest moments, he still felt utterly present. The foundation was flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. We had already funded 3 major conservation projects and established scholarships for students pursuing environmental science degrees. The Trust's ethical investment arm was backing promising startups focused on renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. The journey hadn't been smooth, though. The first months after the revelation were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite my decision not to pursue criminal charges, the emotional fallout was severe. I found myself alternating between righteous anger and crushing doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was I honoring Grandpa's legacy, or somehow betraying it by not seeking full justice? Weekly therapy sessions became my lifeline. Dr. Marshall helped me navigate the complex grief I was experiencing, not just for Grandpa, but for the family I had thought I had, for the parents I had spent a lifetime trying to please. Grief isn't linear, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session, and where grieving is complicated by betrayal and years of emotional manipulation, be patient with yourself. My parents reacted exactly as I'd expected. After consulting multiple attorneys and discovering that Grandpa had indeed created an ironclad trust document, they reluctantly agreed to the conditions I had set. The community service requirement was particularly galling to my mother, who complained bitterly about digging in dirt with common volunteers at the Urban Garden Project. But something utterly unexpected happened around the 3-month mark. My father called me, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. "The watershed restoration project," he said awkwardly. "It's actually interesting." The engineer explained how the natural filtration system works. "It's quite ingenious, really." It wasn't an apology. Not even an acknowledgement of past wrongs. But it was something. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the formidable wall of denial and self-justification. My mother took longer. Her participation in the required family counseling sessions was initially performative at best, hostile at worst. She sat rigid and defensive, deflecting any suggestion that her actions had been harmful. "We gave you girls everything," she insisted during one session. "The best schools, nice clothes, family vacations. How dare you judge us for a business decision made before you were even born?" The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a session when the therapist asked us each to bring a meaningful photograph. I brought the picture of Grandpa and me fishing. Caroline brought a candid shot of the 4 of us at her college graduation. My father chose a formal family portrait from when we were teenagers. My mother brought nothing, claiming to have forgotten the assignment. But at the very end of the session, as we were gathering our things to leave, she pulled a creased photograph from her wallet and placed it silently on the table. It showed her as a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders at a county fair. Both were laughing, her small hands gripping his forehead, his larger one securing her legs. "He taught me to be brave," she said quietly, not meeting our eyes. "To climb higher than seemed safe." I don't know when I forgot that. It wasn't a full reconciliation. I doubted we would ever have the warm, supportive relationship depicted in holiday commercials. But it was a moment of genuine emotion, a raw glimpse of the person beneath the perfect facade. Caroline's journey surprised me most of all. Initially furious about the conditions attached to her inheritance, she had threatened to contest the will, to side with our parents. But something had fundamentally shifted during the revelation at the lake house. 2 weeks after the final meeting, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, her eyes red from crying. "I've been thinking about Grandpa," she said, without preamble. "About how he always asked me real questions. Not about my grades or achievements, but about what I thought about things. And I never gave him real answers. I just said what I thought would sound impressive." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I don't think I know who I am without the act, Amanda. I've been playing a role for so long." That conversation marked the beginning of a fragile, yet profound, new relationship between us. Caroline reduced her hours at the investment firm and began volunteering with one of the foundation's urban education initiatives. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she discovered a genuine talent for teaching financial literacy to high school students. We weren't best friends overnight, but we were building something authentic for perhaps the first time. Coffee once a week became a tradition. Sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, but always honest. My personal life had transformed as well. The foundation work introduced me to a vibrant network of passionate environmentalists and researchers who valued substance over style. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated for my mind and contributions, rather than being measured against impossible, external standards. I developed a close friendship with Dr. Eliza Kaminsky, the brilliant marine biologist heading our watershed project. Her sharp mind and dry humor made long research days fly by. When she invited me to co-author a paper on our findings, I experienced a professional confidence I'd never known before. There was also Mark, the foundation's legal advisor, whose kind eyes and thoughtful questions had gradually evolved our professional relationship into something more personal. Our third date had been a stargazing picnic at the lake house, his idea, after I'd mentioned Grandpa teaching me constellations. Perhaps most meaningful was the mentorship program I'd established for young girls interested in environmental science. Watching them light up during field research trips, encouraging their questions and ideas, I felt Grandpa's influence coming full circle. I was becoming for them what he had been for me, a steadfast believer in their potential and an appreciator of their unique perspectives. The most unexpected encounter came 6 months to the day after the will reading. I was hosting a community open house at the foundation headquarters when I spotted my parents across the lawn. They weren't scheduled to be there. Their community service hours were usually on Wednesdays, and this was Saturday. They stood awkwardly at the periphery, my father examining the solar array with professional curiosity, my mother clutching her handbag like a shield. When they saw me notice them, my father gave a stiff nod. My mother attempted a smile that didn't quite succeed. I walked over, unsure what to expect. "The facility looks impressive," my father said formally. "Very professional operation." "Thank you," I replied. "We're particularly proud of the wetlands reconstruction. It's already showing improved water quality." My mother glanced around at the other attendees, then back at me. "Your grandfather would have approved," she said finally, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. He always did prefer practical applications to theory. Coming from her, this was practically effusive praise. I noticed she was wearing the simple pearl earrings Grandpa had given her for her 21st birthday, jewelry she had previously dismissed as too plain. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. They stayed for almost an hour, asking occasional questions, maintaining careful politeness. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation exactly. but it was acknowledgement. A quiet nod to the reality of my work, a reality beyond appearances. As they were leaving, my mother paused. "Your sister mentioned you found Maxwell's journal," she said, her voice hesitant. I was wondering. She stopped, seemingly unable to formulate her request. "There are some entries about you," I said, understanding what she couldn't ask. "From when you were young, happy memories. I could share copies if you'd like." Something flickered across her face, regret, perhaps, or a deep, long-buried longing. "I would. Thank you." That evening, I sat in Grandpa's study, my study now, reading the journal he had left specifically for after the dust settles. Unlike the cold, hard evidence and letters that had driven the revelations, this was simply his private thoughts, his observations about life and family spanning decades. One entry, dated shortly after he discovered the truth about Riley Innovations, caught my heart, clenching it tight. Asterisk, the hardest lesson of my life has been learning that we can love people deeply and still not truly know them. Elizabeth was the light of my life from the moment she was born. Yet somewhere along the way, she became someone I don't recognize. Do we fail as parents when our children choose values so different from our own? Or is it simply the price of allowing them to be individuals? I cannot change their choices now. But perhaps I can still teach my granddaughters the value of integrity, especially Mandy, who sees the world with such clear eyes. Asterisk, tears blurred my vision as I traced his handwriting with my fingertip. Even in his profound disappointment, he had been thinking of teaching, of growth, of future possibilities. The final page contained what I now considered my life manifesto, written in Grandpa's bold, unwavering script. Asterisk, the greatest inheritance isn't money or property or even education. It's the clarity to see truth and the courage to stand for it. Everything else is just details. Asterisk, I closed the journal and walked out to the dock as the sun set over the lake. A fish jumped, creating ripples that spread in ever-widening circles. One small movement affecting everything around it. Just like truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Asterisk, community garden meeting went well. Mom actually participated. Small steps. Asterisk, I smiled and typed back. Asterisk, progress, not perfection. Dinner Sunday. Asterisk, looking out over the water, turned golden by the setting sun. I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. The inheritance he had truly left wasn't the money, or the property, or even the foundation. It was this, the freedom that comes from living authentically, from recognizing that our worth isn't measured in dollars or appearances, but in the courage to see clearly and act with integrity. The greatest wealth I had learned was the ability to build a life that reflected my true values, not someone else's expectations. And that, I knew, was a legacy worth protecting, worth fighting for. Have you ever discovered an unexpected truth that changed how you saw your family? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.